Hey everybody, it's Matt. Thanks for hanging out with me on my YouTube channel. I think we're having a lot of fun today. I'm joined by Gavin Ortland. He's got a YouTube channel called Truth Unites. He's a really thoughtful, well-educated guy, and I like the way he comes at the conversations. It's just super easy to fight about Christian stuff and Bible stuff. I mean, come on. You're smart. If you're here, you know how the internet works. You know that we live in a click economy, and you know that as a result, the best things, the best tone is not always rewarded. The more outlandish the thing, even if you're a wonderful person, the more likely you are to click on that. And I'm the same way. Nobody's above it. The crazy things grab eyeballs. So what does it look like when you try to talk theology and God and life and death and eternity and the kingdom and the deep waters stuff in a click economy? I mean, you've always got this pressure pushing against you to do things a certain way and adopt a certain tone, whether it's conscious or not. And I really appreciate my guest, Gavin, because I think he's done a great job of resisting that impulse while also resisting the opposite impulse, which is to think nothing and do nothing to just try to get people to get along by pretending that we all believe all the same things, even when really, truly, convictionally, we don't believe all the same things. I think Gavin has done a great job of threading that needle in his internet game. This is somebody I've been looking forward to connecting with for a long time, and I'm really grateful, Gavin, to have you jumping in so we can game out some of the stuff that you have going on and some of these topics you and I have been looking forward to talking about for a while.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, Matt. I appreciate the work you do as well. And you embody the values you just talked about really well on your channel as well. So it'll be fun to talk and encourage each other and hopefully encourage the audience.
So, Gavin, you wrote this book. Tell me the name again.
Yeah, it's called What It Means to Be Protestant, The Case for an Always Reforming Church. If people are wondering what it looks like, it's this green book.
Based on the title of your book, I interpret that to mean that you think Protestantism carries the gospel faithfully. And I guess my question to you would be why? What about Protestantism makes sense? Why are you writing a book, talking about its merits?
Well, one of the things I emphasize early on in the book is the vision of Philip Schaff, who was a wonderful 19th century Protestant church historian. Anybody who's done work reading the church fathers will probably have heard of his name. And he talks a lot about Protestantism as a renewal movement within the church. I think this is a very captivating way to think about what Protestantism essentially is. He's basically saying this is not a sweeping off the table of everything else that came prior. It's acknowledging all the good prior. It's not a rejection of everything outside of its own walls. So Protestants are not bound to reject all non-Protestant Christianity in
Hmm.
terms of its ecclesial status, valid sacraments, salvation, we can learn, and so forth. Philip Schaff had a very, for his time especially, I think a generous posture, and I think that is a strength of historic Protestantism, actually, that it doesn't restrict the church to one institution. At the same time, I think, and so it's able to think a little bit in a more capacious way about just where is the church out there. At the same time, I think we need to immediately on the heels kind of never say that in a triumphalist way to an alternative perspective, because we can admit a lot of Protestants don't bear out that vision today. And so when someone thinks of Protestantism, if that's not the first thing that comes into their mind, that's very understandable. Many Protestants have a little bit more of a sectarian mindset that isn't reflective of actually Luther and Calvin and what their aims
Hmm.
were.
What were their aims?
I think their aims were admirable, and I would sum them up by saying, number one, a renewal of the clarity of the gospel in its understanding, especially among the laity. I think that basically in the late medieval West, there was a great anxiety, as there is today in the world. Great anxiety and uncertainty and a sense of the distance of God. And there just wasn't a clear apprehension among many, though they were clear the gospel did not completely die, but among many of the graciousness of God and that God can be approached on terms of pure grace. Sometimes that was the result of just a lack of bare understanding of the gospel message, even. And other times it was obscured by what practices that what we would regard as erroneous and they regarded as erroneous, like indulgences and other things that are sort of famous in our historical awareness. So I would say that part of the aim is a renewal of in the experience of the gospel. This is what I see as the great strength of Protestantism, is a focus on the clarity and simplicity of the gospel with a result of assurance in the gospel, which is very important to my ministry in Truth Unites. I think that actually we can be assured of God's love. The other things would be a return to the priority of Scripture, the supreme priority of Scripture. Um, Oh, I have another section on the book. What's the other one? Oh, a removal of what I call historical accretions. And by that, I just mean practices and beliefs that had accrued over time gradually that we would regard as not ultimately true and good. And so, the way praying to Mary was functioning at that time, we would say that's an accreted reality that is not good. And so those three things: renewal of the gospel, removal of historical accretions, return to the paramount role of Scripture. That's how I sum up their aims.
Have they failed? Because, I mean, those reforms happened, but they happened only through making new institutions. I mean, those reforms got flirted with at the Council of Trent in the mid 16th century, but I think any reasonable onlooker of church history would say ultimately the Roman Church did not embrace all of those goals, did not embrace all of those reforms on the part of the reformers. So is their vision achieved or is their vision unachieved?
Mm. I would kind of maybe put it like this: it was a good step and good initiative that did good, but remains unfinished. Philip Schaff and his colleague John Nevin, one of the quotes I go through in the book is they talk about how the present state of Protestantism is interimistic. They're saying this is a stepping stone along the way. So they were, in other words, they were acknowledging we have not arrived. We have not achieved the goal. We are in process here. But I think it was a good step. And I would like to clarify for anyone watching here, when we say a renewal within the church, we don't mean only within the Roman Catholic Church, though we can hope for that and hope for dialogue and progress and learn from our friends in that tradition and recognize good in that tradition. But it's not like the goal is just that, because we would say the church is bigger than just the Roman Catholic Church. And there were dialogues with the Eastern traditions, actually. There were efforts, and there wasn't a recognition of their ecclesial status, Eastern Orthodox, the Oriental Orthodox, from the reformers, but then also just the churches, the proto-Protestants, and those who'd been, frankly, excommunicated or persecuted. And they were not under the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church. The Protestants want to say, hey, these are still Christians. The Waldensians are part of the church. The Hussites are part of the church. So I would say, yes, it wasn't embraced by the Council of Trent officially, though that doesn't mean there hasn't been any influence. But so I mean, basically, I think the answer here is we're a mess. we're a mess. But I still think the Reformation was a good thing, and I think it achieved some really huge wins.
Let me ask a crazy 10,000 foot level question. What would success look like for the outcome of the entire Reformation era if 100 years from today it worked out?
I'd say, first of all, a greater recognition of other groups as Christians that are within basic Christian orthodoxy without the qualifications and without the aloofness. And I would say that we have made some progress on that already. I would say that the state of relationship between Protestant and Roman Catholic today versus 100 years ago, I would say is better.
In my experience, it's better. I mean, just for me as a person, every year that passes, that is my new best year in terms of getting to know Catholic brothers and sisters and hearing from them and understanding them better and feeling like they get me a little bit better. So
Yeah.
I'm just one guy, but if that's any microcosm of something bigger, I feel that.
Yeah, I would say my experience is the same way. And then, of course, in addition to, like, if we wanted to, tether our anecdotal experiences down to something more objective, Vatican II has been a game changer for our relationship. And then among Protestants, though, I think we've got a lot of work to do on our own side in terms of just what is this how do we have generosity without compromise? That whole question, I think that's something we've got a lot of work to do on. But so 100 years from now, I could imagine a world in which there was more generosity of posture. I would say then a second thing I would say is greater center of gravity around a kind of Apostles' Creed core.
Hmm.
So I think this will be good for Christians if we're able to rally around the basics. This is why we're concerned about things like the bodily assumption of Mary being an infallible dogma and things like this, because we want to say, let's go back to the core where we are most similar to each other, and what in the early church might have been called something like the rule of faith.
Mhm.
If 100 years from now, that's a more visible rallying point that we're focused upon, even if not in complete alignment around it, but just we're focusing on it more. Uh, that would be a real win. And then I would say, to whatever extent there's a greater Christianization of the rest of the world, will be a good as well. And we we recognize there's a huge increase of secularism, and there's also various other demographics we can identify where there's huge gospel need
Yeah.
still in many parts of the world today. So that my mind, of course, goes to that too for 100 years from now as well.
Does there need to be some sort of institutional merging of all of these different branches of the Christian family tree for the trajectory, the character arc of the Reformation to be resolved in a satisfactory way? Or do you feel like it's actually to everyone's benefit and to the benefit of the kingdom for there to be multiple institutions that persist into the future?
Well, I tend to think about this like this, and I welcome your thoughts about this as well. But denominational and institutional structures I see as a good um, tool for us to function. And I think in the ideal world, we would all be in complete lockstep uniformity. I mean, in the ideal world in heaven, there will not be any sort of fragmentation of any kind, institutional or otherwise. But I also, if we were to ask, is it necessary? Uh, I mean, so if you think about how Jesus is building his kingdom right now, and you think about a remote village that acquires the internet, they don't have any contact with any other Christians. There's not even the possibility for institutional incorporation. You know, they don't have any relationships with anybody, but they come into contact with the gospel, and a church is birthed, and people are worshiping Jesus. People are getting baptized. They are meeting regularly, taking the Lord's Supper, reciting the Apostles' Creed. The demons are pushed back. The sick are healed. The sorcerers lose their powers and burn their magic books and so forth. And all those wonderful things happen that we see when the kingdom of God goes forward. Is it necessary for that? Now, let's suppose that all of a sudden you are traveling, or you're in that part of the world now. What does unity with that church look like? I think so much can happen without some kind of institutional central headquarters that is enfolding all different churches under its banner. So I don't necessarily know, but I do think we need to think about. I mean, I always try to acknowledge Protestant errors as much as I can. I think we can, and this goes back to what Philip Schaff and Nevin and others that we've talked about would emphasize as well, is Protestantism has a kind of downside. It has achieved great purposes, but there's kind of a shadow side, and I think one of those things will be the fragmentation and the kind of just sense of fraying away. And so, to me, as when I'm defending Protestantism, as much as I want to defend it, I also want to encourage and challenge Protestants for us to be alert to and steering away from our weak areas. And one of those will be this kind of a fragmentation, a shallowness, a falling away from church history. And I think this is what I would love to give my life to, is kind of trying to do whatever I can to build something healthy, or not even to build it, just to be a part of something God is doing that is healthy. And I think that will mean, basically, I would love to try to help in my own life as well, strengthen Protestant churches, and bring greater sort of doctrinal depth to historic Protestantism. I think Protestants have that in their own tradition even, but I think a lot of contemporary Protestant churches have lost touch with our own roots and we don't even know why we're Protestant anymore. So there's a lot of rehabilitating that I think we need to do.
Let's say there's a hypothetical red button that got presented to 10 Catholics, and the red button came with the promise that if you push it, Protestantism goes away. It's forgotten, it's gone. You put that in front of each of those Catholics, and the first 9 are like, I'm not sure enough. I disagree with Protestants, but I'm not sure enough to push the button. But the 10th one is like, yeah, I'm pushing it. They hit the button, and Protestantism goes away just in a blink of an eye. What would be lost in the kingdom? What would go away if Protestantism went away?
Mm. It's a fascinating question. Well, currently, almost 1 billion Christians.
Well, that's
Sure.
something. A seventh of the planet.
The loss would be pretty sizable. It's an interesting thought experiment to try to go back in church history and imagine, okay, William Carey, I'll just start with him as an example. A lot of times people like to beat up on the Baptists. So let's pick a Baptist missionary. Okay, William Carey, great man of God. Early years of his missions work didn't see a lot of fruit. We can all be grateful he persevered. I always think of him as a great model of persevering through the early years of ministry. But basically, the entire economy and culture of India is transformed through his efforts in the long run for the good. Um, so, okay, so now you wonder, okay, if Protestantism hadn't happened, or if it goes away, what would this mean for the missions efforts, in this case, of particular Protestants, like a William Carey? You could think of others, for the Bible translations and so forth. I think earlier I mentioned some of the just immediate gains of the Reformation, of the laity having greater access to the Word of God in their vernacular language, being able to know the Scriptures. I think that's a real good thing. The laity receiving the Eucharist more regularly and by actually eating and drinking, as opposed to maybe once a year, just in one kind, the bread only, not the wine, spectating it more than imbibing. Sometimes people aren't aware. These are the on-the-ground realities there. Life in the late medieval era in Western Europe was actually not great. There's a lot of persecution for even among Christians, and that's true for Protestants as well. But also there's just, I would say, the basics, really. I mean, think of the two things I just said: knowing the Bible, like just basic awareness of the content of the Christian scriptures, and receiving what I would call the one sacrament of sustenance. So I believe in 2 sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper. So I would say the Lord's Supper is kind of the ongoing sacrament, not the once for all sacrament. So like those 2 things are pretty big. So if Protestantism goes away, then you could ask a real interesting question of, would those things have happened through other means? Would those things have been reformed in other ways? And that's an interesting question, a tough one to answer. But I basically take the view, I actually think it's really easy for people to beat up on Protestantism sometimes in unfair ways. Because of some of the trends in our current culture that you and I have even talked about, and Protestantism being the default, there are a great deal of criticisms that can be made of Protestantism that are really easy on the street level. But I would say in the big picture, globally, and over the last 500 years, I would say it's absolutely undeniable that Protestantism has been an incredible force for good.
If a Catholic picks up your book and, just as a curiosity, reads through it, what do you hope they come away with?
I hope, first and foremost, it will be something that they won't feel in any way personally attacked by, misrepresented by. The reality is, in my heart of hearts, I have tremendous love and admiration for the Catholic tradition as a whole and many of my friends within it. Some of them are just the most terrific people and way better Christians than I am. So it's not coming from anything like that. On the other hand, I hope they will leave saying, okay, I have been given an explanation from the Protestant side of what they are trying to do, how they understand this famous quip from John Henry Newman, that to be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant. Okay, so I guess they're not just completely historically ignorant. I guess they actually have an answer to that. Maybe I disagree with the answer, but they've thought about church history. They have an interpretation of what the unfolding of the church is throughout church history. On questions of authority, I hope that the chapters on sola scriptura, the idea that the Bible is the only infallible rule for the church. I hope that that will maybe clear away some of the, what I regard as less eloquent expressions of that doctrine, and just in terms of what it means, put forward maybe a better way of understanding that could move the discussion forward. I hope they might find it a little more compelling and a little bit less ridiculous, because I think sola scriptura is often seen as just, oh, I can defeat that in 10 seconds. And I think whatever view we take on that, actually those issues of authority are really complicated. And actually, I think sola scriptura makes a great deal of sense. I think it's a very noble and reasonable doctrine, and actually a very modest doctrine. It's not even claiming that much. So I hope a Catholic could put this down, or an Eastern Orthodox Christian or someone else from another tradition. And I hope then on some particular points that we work through, it might just give just greater understanding. Here's a Protestant argument on these things. I will say that my last comment on this, and I'm curious if you agree with this or not, but as I observe things from my YouTube channel, 95% of our disagreements aren't that both, these two people having this particular interchange have both really studied this and they've come to a different conclusion. That happens. But a lot of it is the discussion is plagued by caricature and aloofness and misunderstanding and so forth. And so if nothing else, I just hope it kind of brings greater clarity to where these differences are and helps people understand, okay, this is why they think Protestantism actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I do agree. And I appreciate everything you just said very much. The way forwards that have been tried, the ways forward, excuse me, that have been tried have been, I think, sort of a really soft ecumenicism. Just lie to each other, pretend we don't think the things we think, and maybe somehow that'll create a peace. I think it's false peace. I don't think it'll hold. I don't think that strategy, I think it's been tested. I don't think it works. The other one is just utterly defeat people we disagree with within the context of historical, creedal, Orthodox Christianity, and defeat them. And then one day we will hopefully stand atop the mountain of bones and dust, waving the flag of our denomination, and we will have won. And then everyone can just sign up for that, bend the knee, kiss the ring, and this will be the new version going forward because we won. Nothing works like that, especially when you're talking about the values of the kingdom of Christ. It simply isn't going to work. What I think will work is convictional unity, being honest about, here I stand. I would love to think your thing for the sake of peace. I deeply want peace with you, but I would like to find a way to have peace while not lying. I don't think your thing. And the only way to get to a place where that rings true is to understand the thing you're rejecting, to understand exactly what someone else thinks, how they got there, how it fits with their larger system, and why it might even be a kind of necessary component for the general cohesiveness of their larger system, but then also to be honest about why you just can't see it that way. Even if I wanted to, I can't think things I don't think. It just isn't how the mind works. Yeah, I made a video a while back making an argument for some ways forward to do the convictional unity thing. And the starkest points of disagreement that I got on that were uninformed. I mean, the most stinging ones were informed and pointed out weaknesses in my argument that unfortunately had merit and made me have to go back and rethink some of the strategy. But most of the pushback, I would say I would chalk it up to insecurity. I don't want your thing to have any merit. I want my thing to have merit. And honestly, I think some of it too, when you get into questions of life and death and eternity, some of it just comes back to you love the people who came before you. I think there is a totally valid and understandable insecurity that comes with the idea of, if my family is wrong about Protestantism and evangelicalism, what happens to my great grandma? She's been gone for a long time. Her life went into this. What happens to her? It is unbelievably easy for me to empathize with a Catholic brother or sister who needs me to be wrong, because in their mind, if somehow a Protestant has a point, or we actually have read a little bit of church history, or there's a reason that we can't see it quite the way maybe a Catholic would see it, I think there's an insecurity sometimes that says, my whole family, generations and generations, including going back to the old country, our hope is in this. We got our baptism records. We did it by the book. We did it right. And I think at some point, you got to cut people slack for that legacy stuff. You have to find some kind of mechanism to be understanding about that, that for some people to irrationally lock in on the position they inherited maybe isn't as irrational as it might seem on the surface. It's a big question and it's a hard question. And if, you talked about some of the weaknesses of Protestantism, well, maybe one of our weaknesses, which at times is a strength, is, I'm from the Wild West, that frontier, individualistic, self-sustaining thing. I love that. That is how we vibe. And I live in the West because I connect with that. But at the same time, there is a collective aspect to this thing too. It's a new family of faith, and it's the body of Christ. That means we are connected by stuff. And I think a little bit of that empathy can go a long way in understanding that there might be rational reasons for disagreement, but those seemingly irrational reasons for disagreement might be rooted in some deep, hidden rationalism as well that we're just not detecting from the outside. And the people who give me the benefit of the doubt like that, when they yell at me on the internet or disagree with me on the internet, I catch that little dose of humanity. I catch that little hint that they think that I might be fair-minded and trying. I might be not an idiot and also not dishonest. And that there might be a way we could disagree that doesn't involve one of us being a moron or a liar.
Yeah, I thank you for what you just shared as well. And if I could just state my appreciation of it in this sense of what one of the things I was benefiting from thinking about as you were talking just there is how easy it is. I'll just again start with myself to fall into a fleshly way of conducting our disagreements. All it takes is like one grumpy afternoon to steer into this terrain where I'm operating from grumpiness, not from or a fleshly place where because you talked about, needing to win. Well, we all can relate to that when you're in an argument and you kind of become impatient or irritated with because it's hard. And actually, my next book is coming out next year. It's called The Art of Disagreeing. So I've just been thinking about this a lot. It's this whole idea of why is it so psychologically frustrating and jarring to hit a genuine disagreement? What is going on psychologically in us when we bump into one of those? And why? Why is it so hard? Why does it frustrate us so much when somebody says something that's the exact opposite of what we would have said? And sometimes it gets under our skin. Why does that happen? But it's very easy to fall into a fleshly way of doing things. And I think what you're talking about, what I'm hearing from your words is the sense of we need to have basically just a godly way of working through our disagreements. And this doesn't mean we don't contend for what we believe in. But, when you were talking about, defeating the other side and on the top of the hill of bones, I plant the flag and I've won, that is very easy to fall into subtly. And yeah, I mean, God calls us to a better way. So, I mean, let's just emphasize something, or I would like to emphasize something you brought up, and that's smart and good people come to different conclusions about these deep-seated issues. And that is worth reiterating because sometimes I think people don't believe that or don't recognize that as much. Maybe it hasn't been our experience, but actually sincere, intelligent people can disagree. Crazy
Yeah.
thought, right? Yeah, it actually happens that you can have good people doing their best to come to different conclusions. But along the way, I think there's a sense of we want to contend for the truth, but there does need to be, I think, for it to be godly and productive in the long run, I do think there needs to be a sense of patience to it. And it's like what you were saying, a sense of empathy, just for the human element. If these conversations are hard, one thing that means, I think, is we forgive each other after we've annoyed each other. I know I've annoyed Catholics at points. No, I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to annoy them, but I'm sure I have. I would hope they'd forgive me and give me grace. And, in the Old Testament, you have a year of Jubilee and everybody goes, you cancel all the debts. It'd be great
Yeah.
if in the Christian world, every now and again, we could have a little Jubilee moment where just say
General amnesty. Yes.
hey, if either of us has annoyed each other over the last year, let's start fresh and try to do better. Now, yet some people are not functioning in good faith, and that conversation will then go differently. But among
Mhm.
people who are functioning in good faith, this sense of, okay, let's try to start over. And then, though, with all of that, just in agreement with you about the squishy ecumenism, this doesn't mean we stop arguing for the truth. I really have respect for people who value the truth so much that they're willing to step into it and make an argument. I don't think arguments are the problem. Uh, in our culture, I think we've just stopped arguing altogether. We just insult each other.
Mhm.
But if we,
Arguments are
arguing,
slow and not clickable. Ad
yes,
hominem attacks are clickable and perform great in a click economy. Thoughtful, patient arguments do not perform well in a click economy.
very well said. But arguments, of course, are a way. I actually think to give a person an argument is a way to honor them,
I
because I'm
agree.
saying, here's an argument, and therefore I'm actually, what is assumed in that is that you will use your reason to evaluate this. And
Mhm.
so, I am contending for Protestantism. I think Protestantism is I think it is true and Catholic, lowercase c. So I'm making an argument for it. I'm contending for it. I think it really matters. I think it's really important. But I guess I'm just wanting to reflect with you about the things you were saying and just emphasize the importance of that, of just the way we have these conversations. Man, we can take 10 steps back without realizing it if we're doing it in a kind of angry, fleshly manner. Or if we do it in a way of just kind of say, who cares, and shrug these issues off because they really matter.
Something that's coming through in everything you're saying is benefit of the doubt, benefit of the doubt, benefit of the doubt. And you're right. There are people who are not operating in good faith. That is detectable. Jesus commanded us in Matthew 7 to identify that and not throw the good stuff there. I mean, it's one of the hardest teachings in all of the Bible for me because I don't want to be mean. It's right next to don't judge. And then the next thing is, oh, also evaluate very carefully. And I mean, those are tough back-to-back teachings. So that acknowledged, I so really appreciate the benefit of the doubtiness of what you were saying. We're recording this, we're in yet another horrible election season. Every 4 years, we start to heal up a little bit in our country, and then people who need us to be angry at each other come along and rip off the Band-Aid and scuff up the wound and make sure it festers all over again and repeat, 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 repeat. I'm very tired of this cycle. I'm very frustrated by it. I'm very frustrated by how gullible I can be in response to people who want me to be angry about political things. It's a quagmire. But one of the things that I think would be an antidote for this, and that I keep wondering, like maybe someday there'll be a presidential candidate who will come along and say something like, "Hey, committed rightists, you got to understand that in the same way that you love life, there are people who are committed leftists who you disagree with about so many things, who look at the data and they really think that the earth is going to get too hot and everyone is going to die and it will take lives. And it's because of fossil fuels." They might be wrong. It is possible to be wrong about that. But they don't want everybody to die because they like life. You also like life. If somebody thinks that you might end up accidentally killing everybody, you should at least listen to their concerns and try to find a way to show that you appreciate the starting point of that discussion. Hey, leftists, there's a half the people in this country who think that when you get an abortion, you're murdering a baby, like killing a baby that can't defend itself. You might not agree with that. You might think they're reading it all wrong and that that doesn't count as a person yet. Okay. But remember how you like life and you make arguments for it in certain places? Well, they like life and they think that that's killing. You could at least listen to that. And you could maybe even consider policies that would say, okay, half the people I share the country with think that these things take human life. What could we do policy wise that would make some effort to accommodate that instead of just constantly telling the other half of the country to shove it and force them as a matter of conscience to go around every day knowing their tax dollars are paying for something they believe to be vile and murderous, whichever way you're talking. How can no one come along and make that argument as a politician or a presidential candidate? Like there's the most obvious points of humanity and connection among people where you could make the case to say, of course, they could be wrong, but these convictions exist and they exist in mass. What might be some constructive ways to move forward or even give some degree of the benefit of the doubt to the other person? But again, elections in the age of the click economy do not reward such mercy. Elections in the age of the click economy reward ruthless stirring of the pot and agitating your base. Okay, I get it. That's world system stuff. That's how that system works. The whole Bible said that's how that system works in one way or another. But the kingdom values are the upside down. They're the inverse of that. So all the more so, wouldn't it make sense for children of the light to be even more shrewd and come along and say, how can I find those sincere intentions of other believers to sincerely glorify God and do kingdom, gospel, redemptive things? And then how might we come up with things that we do together or do apart that give the benefit of the doubt to that other person? But instead, it seems like the strategy often is sit around and wait until somebody wins, and then we'll go be redemptive. And so I guess we're just never going to be redemptive then, because these convictions are not going away. We have a multi-thousand year sample size to say this infinitely translatable gospel is going to be interpreted and internalized in different ways. It's going to manifest a little different in different parts of the world, different cultures, different languages. You can't just wait for it all to get better before you do stuff. And I just keep thinking, what would it look like if we could come up with this kind of verbiage, this kind of way of thinking about baptism in a context that we don't do it, the Lord's Supper in a context that we don't do it, studying and reading the Bible in a context that isn't like the way that we do it? What could that look like if we could just find some sort of internal language that we could use on ourselves as individuals and that we could use to articulate to others who are irritated that we like people from other Christian tribes too much, so that we could do wildly productive kingdom gospel things? And maybe it's just a language innovation situation where we find that language, we articulate that language, and it provides a way forward to do it.
Yeah, the benefit of the doubt thing, boy, it seems like we see the corrosive influence of the loss of that. And I would like to give some breathing room to someone who's watching this who may struggles with that, who may struggle with that. Like, that's hard to do. And when do you find out this? At what point do you conclude this person is not functioning in good faith, and I can no longer give the benefit of the doubt? Well, unfortunately, I guess I want to acknowledge this for the sake of giving some breathing room and for viewers. Unfortunately, the way the world is right now, that happens a lot. There are people who attack you. There are people who malign you. And so as much as we want to give the benefit of the doubt, I guess I want to give some people freedom to use their God-given discernment prayerfully, leaning on the Holy Spirit in dialogue with others to feel, okay, that doesn't mean you sort of lose all boundaries, and it doesn't mean that our convictions aren't held strongly. So you mentioned the pro-life issue. One thing that I find helpful is to triage different issues. Triage meaning ranking them in terms of order of importance. So some issues are going to be so central in my heart. Like at the core of it is maybe something like the resurrection of Christ or something like this. This is a doctrine I'll just get my head chopped off for in a moment. It's, and then the extreme edges would be like the finest little minute details of how to interpret this verse in Revelation or Daniel or something like this. Those are issues. I have a lot more patience for those things. The pro-life issue is one that's really important to me. I'm pro-life, and I feel a sense of, honestly, I think I have to use the word compassion for, just, I remember when studying this and it hit me one time, when someone loses their life and they're not even aware that that is what is happening to them and what they're being deprived of. And this deep conviction coming into my heart of just wanting to do everything I can to be an advocate for those who are in the womb and for life on that issue. But when we're saying give the benefit of the doubt to someone on an opposing side, we're not saying don't cling to your conviction wholeheartedly. We're saying recognize that there's among those who disagree with you, all different varieties. Some are bad faith, and okay, but some are not, and don't assume that they are. And the world will be a better place if we can do that. And so even just, if we like, for me, I'm very much a fan of, you made a great point that we can't wait for all these problems to be fixed and then do these things. So if I have a neighbor right now who is a member of a different Christian tradition than I am, such that we cannot partake of the Lord's Supper. Maybe their church has a teaching that says we cannot partake of the Lord's Supper together. Okay, we can't solve that problem. But in the meantime, before we fix that, a thing we can do is we can pray for each other. I can try to be a good neighbor. I can try to, if he's having an issue with his yard work, I can try to stop by and say, hey, can I help you for a couple minutes? How's your day going? I can, it's a happy thought that rather than get overwhelmed that we can't fix everything, like those little daily steps in the meantime, wherever we can, try to repair relationships and move towards one another. It's wonderful to take those steps, even recognizing this is not solving everything, but it still might be doing something.
That's something. Do kingdom stuff in keeping with the values of the kingdom, even before you have the whole thing figured out. So I really appreciate the time. Where do people get the book if they want to go check it out?
Thanks, Matt. Always love talking with you. People can check it out. There's a website called whatitmeanstobeprotestant.com. And if, depending upon when this video comes out, when they're watching it, it might be possible to still pre-order the book and get some special benefits there. Even if not, though, that website will also still work. It'll take you to Amazon, other places where it is easily accessible. So it shouldn't be too hard to find.
I hope you will go and check out the book, regardless of where you're coming from right now. I know that there are some of you who are in this conversation right now. You're not even sure that there's a God. I know there are others of you who, like Gavin and I, got raised around this stuff, but then it got weird. I get it. I resonate with that. I've been there as well. I know there are others of you who are solidly in a place where you're like, man, it feels like other expressions of Christianity are kind of on my back about the fact that I'm a Protestant. I've had some bad interactions. I know there are others of you who feel the exact same way, except about the interactions you've had with Protestants. I think this book will be fruitful for any and all of you in making the conversation better and in helping make more sense of this very real, very robust expression of historic Christianity. I think it is a book that is intended to and will be effective in nurturing peace through understanding and clarification of conviction. And I think it's offered in good faith, and I think you will get a lot out of it. I hope you'll go and check it out. Gavin, thank you, man. I took a big chunk of your time this afternoon. I'm really grateful for you being here.
I enjoyed it. Hope we can do it again. Thank you.
I would like that. All right. Take care, man.
All right. Thanks, Matt.